I'm presenting on behalf of both of us, and yeah, I think we also wanted to try and have one of these kind of Ivan-type titles for our paper, you know, the kind of A and B without A or B, but then we'd have had sluicing in Korean without sluicing or Korean, and would have been a short talk. And it's going to be short anyway. And I think I'd also like to say, you know, on behalf of Jong-bok and myself, that we wouldn't be who we are today if it wasn't for our interactions with Ivan. In my case, over many years, and in Jong-bok's case, over fewer years here, but then in the time in between. Jong-bok and I have had a very productive working relationship, which only started after we left Stanford, but we had a common bond, which was, I think, working with Ivan, actually, an HPSG. So this topic is kind of in honor of the occasion, something Ivan's worked on in a language that we work on. Okay, so in this talk we're going to look at sluicing in Korean, adapting the perspective on the construction for sluicing in English in Ginsberg and Sarg. I'm sure you all know what sluicing is, but it's examples like, he looked like someone I know, but I can't think who. We always knew he would succeed at something, but we didn't know what. The original transformational approach goes back to Ross, 1969. It's had various incarnations over the years. The underlying assumption is that a WH phrase is base generated in situ, moves up to the front, and then the rest of the clause is either sluiced away or generated as an empty element, which is then interpreted, and so that's the sluicing. So Korean is an SOV language, and it's a WH in situ language, so it's not obvious that it ought to have sluicing, but in fact it seems to have sluicing. And there's just one key difference between the construction or the form in English and the form in Korean that we'll focus on today. So the Korean examples are like this. They say it'll rain, but I don't know when. So 비가 온다고 했는데, and then here's the sluice, 언제니 모르겠다. Okay, so 언제, which is in boldface here, is when, and in Korean you have to have the copula and then an embedded complementizer marking interrogative force. And as an SOV language, Korean always comes with something on the end of the verb, either in the matrix clause or the embedded clause, that tells you what kind of clause you're in. Okay. So without the red parts here, these Korean examples are completely ungrammatical, and I'll come back to this later. Okay, this sluicing-like construction in Korean shows roughly the same kind of effects that have been known for English. So sluicing in English is not sensitive to islands. The correlate of a WH expression in Korean can also be within an island. And I'll skip to the next example, which is a little bit shorter and shows you the same idea. So Mimi bought a big car, but I don't know how big. If you sort of unpack that as a transformational source, it would be, I don't know how big Mimi bought a car, which is an island violation. And as you can see here in Korean, Mimi가 큰 차를 샀는데, and now here's the how big, 얼마나 큰지 모르겠다. Okay? And again, after how big here, you can see this interrogative complementizer, which we've labeled QCOM. So what are the approaches to Korean sluicing? Korean seems to have sluicing. As there is no WH movement in the language, an analysis just like the English one of fronting up to spec of CP and then sluicing the rest away may not be motivated. It won't surprise you that people have tried that analysis for Korean, but there are problems with it. And usually there's a copula present, as I remarked on a few seconds ago, after the WH fragment. And so a very popular analysis, both for Japanese and Korean, has been derivation from a pseudo-clef construction, which I'll illustrate in a second, as this is a type of copula clause, and so it gets the copula in there for you. More recently, many accounts of sluicing have come to the view of what is now known as pseudo-sluicing. And in English, pseudo-sluicing looks like this. Mimi bought something, but I don't know what it was, and then you delete the it was bit. And so you actually you generate what it was, and then you delete that, and that's known as pseudo-sluicing because it doesn't come from a full clause. Of course, this does raise the question about how you interpret, there's some interpretation that is necessary for that. So going back to the pseudo-cleft idea, there are several arguments why the sluicing construction in Korean can't be derived from a pseudo-cleft. If we look at the pseudo-cleft construction, what we find is that if the focus of the cleft is a post-positional structure, the post-position has to be present. This won't look like a pseudo-cleft to you, but it is in Korean. The top line, Mimi received a present, is a nominalized clause, and that's old information, and then new information is presented on the second line. And that's how the structure works. Nominalized, Mimi received a present, and it was from a student. Okay? And in this case, the postposition is obligatory. On the other hand, in clefting, we can have Mimi received a present from a student, but I don't know which student, or I don't know from which student. They're both possible. Multiple fragments are also possible in Korean clefting, so we can say it's not possible to know when and who. As you see here in 7a, this is a naturally occurring example. It's not normally possible to have multiple foci in pseudo-clefts. The pseudo-sluicing source, as I mentioned, has been proposed for many languages because it actually solves this optional add position problem. So again, if we think about English, we can say Mimi received a present from someone, but I don't know who it was, or I don't know from whom it was. I mean, I think they're both in principle acceptable, and that's what we get in Korean. One of the things we need to work on in the future is to see if we can actually discriminate between a pseudo-sluicing analysis in Korean, given that the it is likely to be a null pronoun given other properties of Korean, and a true fragment type approach, where we're just generating a WH phrase as a fragment. This is what Ginsberg and Saag do, and in the rest of the talk I'll talk a little bit about how that would go applied to our Korean data. What's embedded as a sluice in Korean must always be a predicate and an interrogative clause type marker. A bare WH phrase by itself doesn't work. It doesn't satisfy the conditions of the higher predicate. And we've already seen examples in Korean where what is sluiced is a predicate. So this example again, in the second line here, KHU, that's actually the Korean predicate to be big. Okay? So this is actually essentially the verb to be big. Okay, in general, Korean has fragment utterances. That won't surprise you. And in some cases, they're predicates. So the usual way you say yes or no is actually to repeat a verb. So if you say, is Kim here, then you either say is or isn't, meaning yes or no. These are clearly fragment predicates. Fragments can also be regular phrases. So who did Kim meet? We can say Cholsu or Cholsu accusative. We can't say Cholsu nominative because there has to be case matching. If case is marked, it has to match. And not surprisingly, there are also interrogative fragments. Okay, so Kim will come here, why, how, who, with, when, spoken with various degrees of formality. They're all possible. Okay. None of these are possible as sluices because they don't have the right clause type marker on the end. It's also possible to have interrogative fragments. I think that Kim met someone, so who accusative, or the third one shown here with the red part, who was it, so to speak. And that's the one that can be embedded. Okay. Right. So one of the things that we would need to do is to augment the account in Ginsberg and Saag with a selection for a syntactic feature as well. If you're embedding something as a fragment with a declarative interpretation, it has to have a declarative type marker on it. And if you're embedding it as an interrogative complement, it has to have the interrogative marker on it. And you can see this very clearly. This is the most wonderful verb in the history of the world. Korean has a verb which means to be how. It's actually a deictic series. So in Korean, there's a verb to be this way, there's a verb to be that way, and there's a verb to be how. And this is the verb to be how. You can't, it actually just means how. This is the non-finite form. If you want to say something, 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 but I don't know how, you have to say it as in 14a, 어떻게 인지 모르겠다, and you can't just say, I don't know how. The how would be taken as an adverb of the higher clause there, which doesn't help you in any way. Okay. All right, so I'm just about to run out of time, and so what I'll do is just talk about the kind of things that we need. Ginsberg and Saag made a proposal for sluicing, which allows you to take a phrase that they classified as nominal and make that act as a proposition or a question, which is formed out of a proposition, by sucking out other information from the context to build what you need. What we need to do in Korean is modify that analysis to allow a fragment with a verbal head, which can be embedded. And so they had head fragment phrase, and we proposed that we would have something called a pred fragment phrase, which would introduce the finite predicate. This predicate itself would either introduce the interrogative parameter, which is needed for the meaning in sluicing, either directly or as one of its arguments. And so in conclusion, what we see is that the final bullet point here, Korean sluicing is quite like what we see in other languages, except with a clear need for the selection of the embedded clause type. And in fact, the fact that the sluice must be a predicate follows from this, because only predicates in Korean can be marked for clause type. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jean-Pierre.
Do you get amalgams, when you use sluicing for NPs like you do in English and Korean? So things like, I don't know, he said I don't know what to I don't know who, these kind of structures. Do you get these kind of examples?
He said I don't know what?
To I don't know who, or he said you can't imagine what to. These kind of amalgams, do you get those in Korean?
So you get these things like what and when. You get those. I don't know if that's exactly the same. You get this kind of thing.
So in English, you can take a sluice and then you can basically generate an NP from the W, so to say, for an object. And I was wondering whether you get these kind of exocentric structure in Korean too.
I guess I still haven't quite got the example. So what's your example again?
He said you will never believe what yesterday too.
Oh, okay. Oh, I have no idea. I highly doubt it. Just because I just don't think you could get the morphosyntax right. But right, yeah. So rather than, yeah, well, maybe you could. So this is like, I don't know how many people are coming, that kind of construction?
No, George Lakoff's syntactic amalgams.
Okay.
He said, I don't know what, to I don't know how many people.
Oh, I see.
What is it?
He said, I don't know what, to I don't know how many people. Okay, now I've got it. Thank you.
Thank you for translating.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's good. It's a great thing to look at.
He said, I don't know what, so I don't know how to.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, one of Lakoff's examples was Jack invited I don't know how many girls to you can imagine what kind of a party.
After Googling them.
I mean, I don't see them as related to sluicing.
Yeah.
You could dismiss the question as
Yeah.
as your advocate, that's what I would say. Your client does not wish to answer.
John, frankly, you're very